able to at least do these recordings so that we can have some semblance of feeling like that we're together. This evening's devotional comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. Paul says, "So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." Well, not everything that is unseen is eternal, thankfully. Unless you have a microscope, you aren't seeing this virus that threatens us. However, we do see its influence, we see its results, we see its outcomes. But what I like about what Paul says here is, he says we need to fix our eyes on another unseen set of realities that are lasting, that are eternal realities. So how do we fix our eyes on something that we can't see? My mind immediately went to Romans chapter 1, verse 20, where Paul also writes, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." I love creation. In fact, really, God used His creation to bring me to Him. It caused me to recognize that there's something much smarter and much wiser than we are that made all of this happen. And let's face it, we have more time to notice what's around us. There's evidence of God all around. Just the other day I looked out my back window and there were a number of couples of redbirds, cardinals, in the trees. And then, of course, the robins and the red-winged blackbird. In fact, to me, spring has come when the red-winged blackbirds arrive, and that was a couple weeks ago, and when the little Dairy Queen in Urbana opens, which also was a couple weeks ago. To me, that means spring has arrived. These are all signs of an early spring that we're excited about. They all point, though, to an amazing, intelligent Creator. Speaking of birds, Jesus had something to say about birds. Matthew chapter 6, verse 26, He says, "Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" So a couple things in this context that I think of. Do not worry. In fact, Jesus says this in the context of this passage at least 3 times. Do not worry. He points out that birds aren't farmers. They don't run combines. They don't stack the hay in the barn like I had to as a teenager in 100-degree weather. In fact, Tony Evans is the one who says that birds don't sit on the branch with their beaks up into the air wondering where their food's going to come from. God has provided for them. Even if you and I don't set out bird feeders, God's got them covered. They're going to be taken care of for the most part. And then Jesus closes with this rhetorical question. Aren't you more valuable to the Father than these birds? The Heavenly Father is not surprised by what's been going on around us. He knows what's happening. And He tells us, do not worry. The other thing I point out in this passage is that the things that are of earth, even the things we love, and thankfully the things that we don't care about or we don't love, like this virus that's going around, they're temporary. They will not last forever. I think of the phrase that Mark Lowry, who hung around with the Gaither vocal band for years, one of his favorite phrases out of the King James was, "And it came to pass." This too will pass. Paul says we need to fix our eyes. We tend to fix our eyes on too much of what's around us with this corona thing. But he says fix our eyes, lift them a little higher. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 12 it says fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and finisher of our faith. Sure, we need to be careful. We need to follow the guidelines. We need to watch. We need to wash our hands. We need to watch what we're doing. But all of this is going to pass. One of my favorite district superintendents, his name was Dr. Neil Strait. One time when we were busy and trying to get a building project finished, and it just seemed like it was never going to end, he looked at me, and he could tell with the wisdom of his eyes, he said, "Keith, it'll get finished. And this will end as well." You know, some of you lived through Pearl Harbor. Some of you lived through tornadoes. Some of you have lived through earthquakes and floods. And many of us lived through Y2K. And many of us lived through 9/11. This too will pass. And we will look back and say, God was with us all the way. God bless you.